Thank God it's Friday. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Business Morning. Let's do Friday business. I'm Ini John McQuarrie. We'll start from the global space. As usual, oil prices were a little changed on Friday, but were set for their biggest weekly decline since October, as the uncertainty around the U.S. tariff policy is creating concerns about demand growth. At the same time, major producers are set to increase output. That's OPEC plus. So look at the numbers for this morning. It's 13 cents gain. That's what Brent has, but it's still below the 70,000 that we've come to know this per commodity for. 69.59. That's what it has at this time. WTI, of course, is lower than that, $66.44 after it gained 0.08%. However, for the week, Brent is down 4.9% and set for its biggest weekly decline since the week of October 14. WTI is set to drop 4.8%. That's also the biggest weekly fall since that week. Markets, including oil, have been whipsawed by the fluctuating trade policy in the United States, which is the world's biggest oil consumer. Tariffs themselves are considered a drag on economic growth and therefore oil demand growth. But the uncertainty over the policy is also slowing business decisions, which is creating impact in various ways in various economies. Let's come to Nigeria, where the central bank governor, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso, yesterday, with members of the Bankers Committee, they took a tour around the National Arts Theatre. This is the governor's first visit since the Bankers Committee started the renovation and upgrading of the facilities in July 2021. Well, Mr. Cardoso said he was impressed with work done so far, but notes that the creative sector has great potentials to generate revenue, acting as a powerful engine for broader economic growth. And the National Theatre, he says, has a major role to play in achieving this.
It is estimated that the creative sector can potentially generate about 25 billion US dollars. Okay? This, to my mind, will be a great catalyst for that to happen. And of course, as that happens, so will the prosperity of not just the creatives, but all Nigerians. And with that, I believe it will serve as a very powerful signal to the potentials for collaboration. I'm very certain that the partnership that has taken place between the private sector and public sector that has resulted in this, that spirit in conjunction with the Nigerian people will take us to the next level.
Well, Nigeria's budget may have gone through the legal procedures and gotten the assent of the president. Implementing it is another issue. That's why the NISER, they're concerned about this, and they held a one-day seminar on this.
The social cost of the reforms have been very, very high.
It's a seminar to discuss the possible impacts of the 2025 budget on businesses and the economy generally. Conversations here are to explore how the planned spending can be efficiently implemented. The Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf, has his eyes on the private sector protection.
When market phase, that is the basis of government intervention in an economy. Because people tend to think that the private sector or the market can fix everything. Don't say leave everything to market forces, those are market forces. It penalizes, especially the vulnerable segments of society. It penalizes the real sector of the economy.
For the panelists, the issue of debt should be intentionally handled.
Because we know that one of the sources for government to raise revenue is looking at tax. Now, yes, if you look at our tax to GDP ratio, or what the key newspeak has said, about 10% or thereabout. And the benchmark, according to the African AFGB, is about 15%. So we are still far.
Actually pay what he has taken. And in an economy like this, what you should expect is that with stable foreign reserve, the country needs not be able to, will be able to pay the outstanding debt. But in Nigeria, we have two factors playing in this particular issue. One, we have high exchange rate, and the second one is that we keep on getting fresh or borrowing.
For the host, the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research, Professor Anthony Atsimbine, the goods and the seeming bads present opportunities that could be harnessed.
Any situation has both its downsides but also has opportunities, and the point is for businesses to look at the opportunities that they can take advantage of under and during the implementation of the 2025 budget. Issues such as implementation, strict implementation, accountability, as well as transparency on the part of government have been raised here, and it will be good for government to also know that this will help to see to the success of the budget.
The Institute says there will be a policy brief that will be shared with the government as their contribution to a successful implementation of the 2025 budget. Now, Nigeria's Rural Electrification Agency has issued a tender for companies to provide operations and maintenance services for 7 hybrid solar plants at educational institutions, totaling 32 megawatts of PV capacity. Also, about 45% of Nigerians do not have access to electricity, and that's why the government is looking the way of powering rural communities through alternative sources. Apart from that, the government has announced that they will use some seized funds, to take care of this budget. The latest, I think, is from the former Petroleum Resources Minister, Mrs. Desiani Alison Madukwe, that to be used to fund electrification projects across the country. Let's find out the thoughts of an individual who is in this space, electricity and all of that. The Managing Director of CSS Technologies, Mr. Arthur Usuagu, joins us virtually. Mr. Usuagu, good morning, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ini, for having me.
So I wonder what your thoughts are about this issue of using recovered fund for rural electrification.
Well, it's a good idea, but we shouldn't hinge this on using the recovered fund only, because electricity is a bedrock. When you think about anything that has to do with development in a country, this is an area where a quantum of the national budget should be devoted to, solving the electricity problem in the country. But, pushing it from the angle of using a partly from money gotten from people that have been alleged to be corrupt, or monies recovered from people who have been tried and forfeited their asset, devoting that to electricity is just a scratch in terms of the total quantum of what we require to fix the electricity problem in Nigeria.
Well, I think now we do have the challenge of consumers being reluctant to also pay for what they are consuming.
Yes, that is a problem, because if you look at that, quite a lot of factors, are really causing this, because consumers want to pay for what they have consumed if they are sure that the bill that is coming to them is actually what they have consumed. They will be ready to pay for it. But you and I know that the meter, integration into our electricity subsector is still very, very low. As it is today, we still have less than 40% meter penetration. So majority of consumers are still being, connected via what we call a kind of a billing that is estimated. So consumers will find it a bit awful to be paying what actually they did not consume. That is why you see these apathy on the part of subscribers to actually pay, because they don't believe what they are being charged is the real quantum of what they have consumed. That is the problem bedeviling that sector as it is today.
Okay, and we've been talking about the issue of metering for a while in Nigeria, but it does seem that when it comes to the issue of rural electrification, government looks more to renewable sources. Is that correct?
Absolutely. In this case, I agree with government completely. You know, Nigeria is located within the sun belt of the equator, and we have a lot of sunshine. So we need to harness the opportunity that is available in terms of solar energy. I have advocated in different fora that there is no need for us to keep running the main grid system, mono grid system, that we can cut off some of these communities, some of these states from the national grid and interface it with the renewable. We can have majority of states in this country that are located, especially in the north, being connected with solar energy, because the prices are going down and the inputs, you know, to create some of these solar infrastructure, they are bound everywhere. So it's an area government needs to put in a lot of effort so that we can reduce the concentration of power in our grid system. This alternative energy format will solve the problem of energy inefficiency in this country. So it's a way to go. We need to put in more money and ensure that we connect more communities in this renewable energy framework that will help the country out of this darkness that we've always been in the last 30 years.
So it does seem like we may come back to the same challenge we are facing now, because if we say we should turn to alternative sources of energy, and then of course we cannot expect the government to be the one to fund it. It is to attract private investment. But now we notice that consumers are reluctant to pay for what they consume. Then what's the incentive for the private sector to come on board?
I can tell you that it's going to be a win-win arrangement. When you install your solar infrastructure, you don't pay bill on a monthly basis. Let's say, for example, you install solar infrastructure to serve you. You discover that it's only the amount of money you spend in terms of putting it together. Once the sun is there and once the installation is bespoke enough, you discover that you are not going to be paying cost for rental and electricity bill.
But sorry, Mr. Swagbo, even the overhead cost to get it, the initial cost is huge, and it's discouraging, you know, individuals from going there. So, I mean, before we talk about the maintenance and sustainability, how do we even start if the first cost is so high that people cannot afford it?
Yes, that is where government needs to come in. Currently, government pays within 700 to about 900 billion yearly to, you know, subsidize electricity. Before this issue of removing the subsidy and increasing electricity tariff came up. So what they need to do is still the same thing. Government can come in to reduce the initial cost of installation of this renewable energy system in such a way that government can make it very, very cheap, so that people can, you know, tie into them, and the initial cost of investment of moving to these renewables will be much easier for consumers, you know, to get into it. When they do that and they are removed from the national grid, you will see the quantum of trouble that the national grid is having will be reduced. So this is the way government should go via this rural electrification approach. So, you know, subsidize the solar panels, subsidize the inverters, subsidize some metering system, also subsidize the batteries, which is the most expensive aspect of the entire materials you need to put this solar system upstream. So if government comes into it and subsidize these basic needs, what you will find is that majority of the consumers will be taken off the grid network, and the grid that is in a comatose state at this time, the troubles we are having there will be reduced, and the entire electricity quantum that is available to consumers will be that will move penetration of electricity in Nigeria close to 70 to 80%. Government need to take the initiative, quite frankly.
So, from your perspective now, where does the new law, we've had amendment to electricity law that now empowers states to fully participate, generate, and all. Where does that fit in, or where does this renewable energy intention and plans, where does it fit into the new law?
Yes, in fact, when that law was amended, I was one of those who really jumped up and said, yes, this is the right step in the right direction. Lagos State is pushing that. I know Edo State is also one of the states that are trying to, tap into that arrangement. What will happen, I've always said that they don't need to connect this to the national grid. Let them set up quite a lot of solar farms and connect it in an off-grid arrangement. Then disconnect those who are currently connected to our national grid to feed directly into this new approach of renewable. So once that is done, because you can decide to say, okay, each home can work within a 5 kilowatt energy, from the renewable area. Then we can also do an interface between, so that we have what we call an energy mix arrangement. We have the solar in there, we have gas, and other aspect of generation. So once we do that, the dependency on the grid will be reduced, and we can now deliver enough power, catchment power, to these people who are currently not connected at all. So this is the way to go, and it's the cost government, as I said earlier, can subsidize to ensure that we have a maximum penetration across boards.
So in conclusion, Dr. Osuagwu, you do support this use of recovered funds, for electricity, but I'm sure the other part of the conversation will be who will check, how do we ensure that it is not re-looted in the process of being used for these projects?
Absolutely, it's a good initiative, and all hands must be on deck. Not only looted money, government should ensure that more funds are allocated, to electricity subsector. Because without electricity, we'll keep on moving within a circle. We need electricity to open up the country and bring in foreign investors, be able to change a lot of things, which currently is not happening. But once you have electricity, you open the door for different level of development, and that will transform to a better economy for Nigeria as a nation. It's a good way to go, and we will put our hands on deck to ensure that we push it to a logical conclusion.
All right, more hands on deck there. Thank you so much, Dr. Arthur Osuagwu, the Managing Director of CCS Technologies Limited. I see you on a journey. Wish you a safe trip.
Thank you so much, Ini.
Well, we're still discussing electricity now, but we're right here in the studio with the Director, Strata Power Utility Nigeria Limited, Mr. Chuks Nwani. Right here, Mr. Nwani, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
So I'm sure you heard most of our conversation with Dr. Osuagwu there. Alternatives seem to be the way now, but the issue of cost is still a deterrent. Can you think of ways that these can be handled?
Thank you very much. I think significantly I agree with the doctor. However, I have a little bit kind of alternative, which I think is going to be a mix between the solar and also the state grid. Because with the new law empowering the state to develop support in terms of power development and all that, most of the states now are looking at creating a state grid, which will now be able to deliver more power through the state grid infrastructure directly to the sub-disco infrastructure. So for me, why solar appears to be a very good alternative, but we should be able to create a mix, because solar in itself is a peaking plant, not a base load, meaning it supports already the existing generation. Because if you want to make it base load, it means you have to invest in battery, and you know battery is very expensive. So, but if basically on the panel, which you know during the day you're able to generate and also distribute, then you have a state grid in terms of generating through other sources like gas, supporting that solar system. Then you're able to reach out beyond the within the town to the villages. So with that,
But sorry, so I don't lose what you just said. You're saying that the panel can be used without batteries, because I thought that power is collected through the panel and stored in the battery for whenever you want to use it. And we know the issue with batteries, they're the most expensive, it's imported, and you know the power life or is something else. So can the use of battery be eliminated in the use of solar electricity?
yes, absolutely. You know, during the day, the sunlight directly generates the power through the panel, and you can be able to consume directly and then store part of that power.
Where do you store
You
it?
store it in the storage. That's the battery.
Exactly.
So that the essence is to use it later on when there are when there is no sunlight. Now, if you're able to generate directly and use during the day, then at night and you have from the grid or from the local grid, you are able to have the cost in terms of the initial capex for the panel is low compared to the battery.
So what
now
if supply, because we don't control supply, individuals don't control supply. So what if the supply comes, you know, during the day when you also have your solar? Then, I mean, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, during the day, because you have already procured the solar. Our market is not mature now. Had it been our market is mature, during the day, when you are generating excess, you can actually sell to the state grid. So that at night, you can net off from what you have sold to the state grid. So some of us, what we are projecting, because we have been talking with a couple of state governments, I said, look, they say need, now you've been giving powers to fashion out your own electricity markets. They say need to develop your state grid, such you don't depend fully on the national grid. Meaning that you could set up various embedded generations within several locations in the state, which can feed into that state grid. The grid becomes like one grid that supports the entire state, such that more investors can come in. You have different players generating from different locations, feed it into your state grid. Your state grid now supports the local distribution network, which feeds the customer the last mile. All right. So with that, you're also able to support with the solar at major other rural areas, and be able to have because price is usually an issue. And when you don't get the pricing right, of course, the customer tend to complain. So our view is that now that the state have been given the powers, they need to invest more on the state grid and support the national grid, because we know that the national grid cannot have enough to feed the supplies.
So this state grid now is supposed to have contribution from private, independent power, mostly, not individuals, because we know, I know I've had this conversation a couple of times where they said that the power that we generate in Lagos from generators is enough to power the whole of Nigeria, but because it's not coordinated, I think we may also have to apply that to even solar, because you see a lot of panels on homes at this time, but it's not coordinated. So that's also another thing. So are you saying that all of these can be channeled into the state grid and then it will be more coordinated. But how do we achieve that?
Absolutely, of course. This is through the continuous policy process. Because now that the state have been given powers, they are going to be, and most of them have set up their own regulator. Those several policies are going to be put in place in terms of how do we galvanize all these generations from different spots, and where are they going to be the feeding points into this grid. So with that kind of the designing the market, you could see different players, even those who generate for themselves, able to even sell to that state grid. So you could now have, to the extent that you may even have an excess power. Because if I'm generating enough for myself, and I have more power to deliver to the grid, you that is not generating, you could be able to take power from that. So it's going to be a policy process through the State Electricity Regulatory Commission, which I know most of the states have currently in place. So with that, I believe that that could be able to create that synergy between those who want to invest in generation and those who want to invest in the last mile. Because you see, these are segments. There are those who is also interested in investing even in the state grid. There are those who are interested in investing in various generations, such that the state grid becomes like an open access. Open access means that anybody could generate, put in power. This power is measured from the point of putting it into the state grid. Then there are other players in terms of the last mile distributors to customers who now take this power from various points and now do the last mile. So I believe that a couple of states are already looking in that directions and creating different segments of market to make this power available.
It sounds like a very technical process. It's going to need very technical and skillful individuals, maybe because I'm standing on the outside. Perhaps for you it's not. But I hear you talk a whole lot about policy. So policy on the one hand, the infrastructure is also another, because if we're going to have a feeding point into the state grid and all of that, I don't think we have that already, or do we?
Of course not, but I'm aware that a lot of states are already looking into that direction. So I can talk of Ogun State. I know His Excellency and the essay to the governor on power, it's part of the priority, because they believe that Ogun State has so much sources that energy can be generated and injected into that point. So they are already creating a kind of a market structure with different players coming in. So of course, it's the policy that will be able to incentivize the private investors to come in to make.
What kind of policy do you think can give enough incentive to drive private sector investment?
Okay, one of the policies is like in terms of what we call an open access. If there is a state grid has enough incentive in terms of the transmission cost, meaning the good number of cost, maybe like between 12, 18 naira for transmission on the line, a lot of investors who are willing to invest on that trust, because they are looking at it as a long-term 20 to 30 years investment, meaning that powers collected from various sources has to go through that grid. And for every power going through that grid, as an investor, you are making money. Now the guy and the last mile delivery, it's very happy that, look, there is a guarantee in terms of this power to be on this grid. And then we're also able to guarantee our customers that at all time you have power. So at each of the value chain, we'll be able to support each other to ensure that you are meeting each of the obligations.
So let's not forget that we're in Nigeria and we're still dealing with Nigerians. So whether it is a state grid or a national grid, there are common issues around it, which is why in a similar conversation that I had, someone talked about the government giving a kind of insurance. If, for instance, as an investor, my income, my revenue is threatened, can the government come in and give some kind of insurance if customers do not pay or delay to pay and all of that? Can the government give some kind of insurance, to ensure that even though the consumers are not doing what they ought to be doing at some point, or there is a disaster that causes, that I will still be in business and I can still survive?
Well, for me, I think that will be like taking us backwards, because we've been in this situation before when the power was privatized. And we have various government support in terms of subsidies and all that. And we've seen that it has never worked. For us, I think what we work is in terms of policy consistency. If you say, okay, there's no energy theft, we want to stop energy theft, and there are issues on energy theft or non-paying bills and all that, and an investor wants to disconnect a customer, you need to support that investor to do that. Because I believe that if government comes in, keep putting in money, keep putting those incentives, even in terms of people develop confidence, investors' confidence in making further investment will not be there, because be rest assured that most times government defaults in making some of this payment, and it keeps accumulating. For me, I think that we need to be able to implement any policy we have in place. Today we talk about meter bypass, and you discover that, like some of us who are players, I have businesses, I have also run a distribution company. You report that, my meter has been tampered and all that. Our staff were at fault. You discover that there are no mechanism to be able to help you to enforce that. So at the end of the day, you become more powerless. You keep managing, and if that keep going, the incentive for you to keep investing is not there.
So which is why this individual is asking that government ought to come in there. I mean, the issue of power theft and non-payment of dues, as you said, as a player, you a lot of time become powerless. And the individual, the consumer, is still there doing what they're doing, even when you know that they're doing something wrong, you can hardly do anything about it.
That's why I would say that the government needs to implement, if they agree that power theft attracts certain sanctions, government or the instrument of government, that they'll be used to be enforced that. Because as a private person, I don't have that instrument to enforce that. But I can leverage on various government institutions, like the police, like possibly some, I think they're setting up some power theft tribunals and the rest, to be able to enforce that. So those supports has to be there. Government needs to provide those supports. Government needs to ensure that if I report that my staff have been fought by a customer because wanted to disconnect, certain steps have to be taken.
Doesn't matter whether it's a government agency, ministry, or is a very rich man in the country or a politician. These are the realities.
Exactly, and that's what we've been going through. In fact, today, if you look into the market, you discover that the MDAs are possibly the highest debtors in the market, and they contribute over 60% of revenue losses.
So now, how do you fight the government with a government instrument? Because the MDAs are government and they are owing. So what do you do about them?
So these are where I think the government needs to be able to put up some structure. I mean, using maybe like the Office of the Accountant General, the CBN, and where some of this payment can be paid from the source. So you don't need to go to those institutions in order to start getting it, because basically you may not be able to get your money. So I think we need to have a kind of a discussion where government put in place some kind of settlement arrangement using the Central Bank of Nigeria as the settlement house to be able to settle those debts, because those debts contribute so much in terms of why the market is not properly functioning or why the market is dysfunctional.
So that's why I said, whether it's the state grid or a national grid, these are the issues that have kept the sector, the electricity sector, down. So if they're not dealt with, whether it's the state or the federal, we will still go back to the same issue.
Yes, I agree absolutely. And that's why I think with the state grid, now, and of course the state knowing that, look, if there are shortfall, who take responsibility? There needs to be a kind of conversation between the state and federal government. For every federal government facility or state government facility, someone has to take responsibility. Like the state government facility, of course, the state governor through maybe the Accountant General of the state, we need to be able to find a way to, those payments has to be made, either deducted from the ministry's allocation. Then for the federal government, especially where you have military facilities, I think because we all know what happened recently in terms of one of the discos trying to recover some of their payments. So I think they need to be that kind of structure where the federal government needs to work with the CBN. And part of the funding going to some of these agencies can be set aside for the payment of their bills.
Now, paying from source.
Paying from source, exactly.
All right, but assuming that all of this works out, we pray it works out, what happens to the existing discos and what happens to the national grid?
See, the existing discos and national grids are still very, very fundamental in terms of the power delivery. Because the fact that the state government are now able to manage does not mean that they cannot no longer rely on the grid. However, the grid just provide like kind of support in terms of if you don't have enough, you can also take from the grid. Because basically, the way the infrastructure is designed is that there is the grid has a 330 and 132 substation. The local grid has 33 substations and 11 substations. So basically, there could be a co-location between that. There's already a co-location between that 132 and 33. So the state grid can go directly to the 33, and the national grid comes from the 132 down to 33. So from that interface, if there is enough power from the state grid, of course, you may not need to take from the national grid. But if there are not enough power from the state grid, then
the states will pay the national grid for supply.
There's going to be a reconciliation of what actually coming from the national grid and what comes from the state grid. That's how that settlement arrangement is.
And the funding, I'm trying to understand how the funding will be for the national grid.
No, for the national grid, there is already those infrastructures are already there. It's just in terms of reinforcing them, adding additional substations that will enable them to take more power. Those infrastructures, it's the state grid that the infrastructures are not yet there, which is very good now that they are now developing it from the scratch. So they are going to design a grid that is very reliable, that is able to deliver power on a 24 basis. And I'm telling you this because we are doing it, and we've been doing it since 2021. We've never had a downtime along this axis.
Yeah, but the thing is, one thing we've come to see with our infrastructure is maintenance. Are we having that as part of the plan? Because even with the national grid now, grid is collapsed, grid is mostly because of the age. It's aged, it's been there for decades and all of that. So do we have that, the maintenance of it, as part of the plan at this initial time? I'm talking about the state grid now.
Of course, and when you talk about the issue of maintenance is all about funding. If the incentives are there and we have the right numbers in terms of tariffing for that state grid, definitely maintenance is part of the KPIs, whoever is managing that state grids, in terms of ensuring that part of the revenue coming in from the transmission is reinvested into maintaining that grid. And because this grid is being built brand new, it's still going to take a long time before you start having the kind of issues we are having today.
Yeah, but let's walk against it from one side. But thank you so much for this very technical conversation. Director of Strata Power Utility Nigeria Limited, Mr. Chukwuani.
Thank you.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll head to the global scene and give you a little bit of what happened in the market yesterday. Just stay with us. Welcome back to watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. Just before we head to the global space, let's tell you how our market closed. That's the Nigeria stock market and other markets. We saw the all-share index yesterday. For the first time this week, had a green color. Goodness, 0.32%. It was because of the banking stocks. A lot of them did gain, but we're still on the 106,000 level. Equity cap at 66.86 trillion naira. Activity was mostly red. Volume 372.72 million. Value 10.19 billion, and deals 11,447. That was the only green that we had yesterday. Top gainers yesterday were Transcore, Score, and Afri Prudent. They were the top gainers for the day. Top losers, Sony Assurance, MRS has been doing well. So I mean, when we see MRS and the top losers, I guess it's just time that investors are taking profit. Then there's Red Starex also. But top trades had the movers off the market yesterday. GTCO, Accessco, and Zenith Bank. There you have it. GTCO 49.95, Access 43.87, and Zenith 36.51 in volume of trade yesterday. So for the first time this week, we had that positive trade. Thank God. Going to the smaller market, the NESD OTC market, we saw also a positive number at the close of trade, 0.44%. The share index there, 1.9 trillion naira. Activity was all green, from the volume to the value to the deals, and the stocks traded, they were green. Yesterday, volume was so much, 3,307%. In one trade. That's awesome. Value, 34,000 deals, 236,000. So it was a very bubbly market for the smaller unlisted market yesterday. And then, well, the fixed income market, we know, I believe there was a treasury bond yesterday also, but we will have the details of that with Anita later on at 1 p.m. during Business Incorporated. We hope that you will join us then. So now let's head to the global space and see what's happening outside our shores. The housing market in the United Kingdom experienced a slowdown in February as potential buyers rushed to make purchases before the end of tax incentive, which is March 31. In an unexpected turn, house prices fell by 0.1% following a revised growth of 0.6% in January, and these figures fell short of all predictions in a poll by economists. So that's the UK there. Not expected, but I guess all the extra funding for defense and all of that, they will show up in different ways, and that's one way that the UK has seen that. Now we move to Germany, where German industrial orders in January went down by 7% from the previous month. The Federal Statistics Office has said that the previous month's upswing from bulky purchasing petered out. December orders had risen significantly more than expected on a burst of demand for aircraft, ships, trains, and military vehicles. There you have it again. The defense sector is making money amidst all of what's going on in the world. The parties hope to form Germany's next government this week and agree to overhaul borrowing rules to boost defense spending and have earmarked 500 billion euros for infrastructure investment over 10 years. Now we go to China, where export growth slowed. Seems we have a lot of slowing this morning, more than expected at the start of the year, while imports plunged as lackluster domestic demand and U.S. tariffs challenged Beijing's bid to bolster sluggish growth. And this is in spite of the stimulus, or this is before the stimulus has just been released. Exports in January to February period rose 2.3% in US dollar terms from a year earlier, and data from the Customs Authority showed significant undershooting expectations of a 5% increase. Remember, that was the news earlier this week, and that marked the slowest growth since April last year, when exports increased by just 1.5%, according to their data embassy. Now, in the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration briefly halted flights to several Florida airports on Thursday night after a SpaceX Starship testing failure. The incident marks the second time this year that SpaceX experienced a mishap during a flight test of Starship, resulting in debris raining down and commercial flights disrupted. Affected airports included International Airport, which is an American Airlines hub, an airport serving Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, Orlando, and Florida. We're still in the United States. Cryptocurrencies went down yesterday night after President Trump signed an executive order creating strategic Bitcoin reserve for the United States, and separately a digital asset stockpile. One would have thought the reverse would be the case. Well, the price of Bitcoin lost 3% to about 87,000. And then earlier losses in other coins, specifically those that rallied at the beginning of the week after Trump said that they would have included in strategy, also eased, and Ether was down 2%. And we'll discuss this more during Business Incorporated. So that's another attraction for you to join us at 1 p.m. To see what's going to happen, or why one would have thought, since the reserve has been created, it to be positive, but we saw otherwise. Now, also, no longer news now. President Trump is not interested in climate agreement, and of course, the U.S. is like the biggest fund raiser for that, and they're supposed to be helping small group of developing countries. We know the promises that have been made to smaller companies in the area of climate change management and the consequences and all of that. So now with this pullout by a major funder, what's going to happen? We're going to speak to Dr. Malcolm Fabi. He is in the Washington area in the United States. Dr. Fabi is climate, technology, and sustainability expert. Dr. Fabi, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Great. So I don't think the world is surprised that President Trump is not in agreement with the climate issues. He expressed this during his first term, but did it come as a surprise that the U.S. is now out of the Paris climate agreement?
No, I think you hit the nail right on the head. This was something that Mr. Trump did in his first term, and therefore it was really not a surprise to anyone that one of the first things that his administration has done is to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord.
So what can we expect now? What impacts? You are into sustainability, and climate change is a big deal for individuals like yourself. What do you expect after this pullout?
You might be surprised to hear that I really don't expect that a lot will change. And there are several reasons why. The first thing is, as soon as the announcement was made, 24 US states, led by states like California and New York, formed something called the US Climate Alliance. Those states make up 60% of the US economy, and they make up 55% of the US population. And the first thing that those states said was that they would remain committed to the ideals and the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. And so what that means is they are still on track to get to 50% of 2005 level emissions by 2030, and by 2045 to reach up to 60% reductions over 2005 levels. I must also say that, states like California, for example, that's the 5th largest economy in the world. New York, which is also part of this 24-state alliance, is the 10th largest economy in the world. So one of the things that you will find is that, at the end of the day, a nation makes commitments, but it is also the sub-nations within that nation, the ones that are actually consuming energy, generating commerce, because at the end of the day, climate emissions, carbon emissions come from the use of energy, and you're using energy to generate economic growth. And so, yes, it is a step back for the world that the US has, again, withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord. But I think the good news, a little bit of good news that we have here is that the number of states, very significant states, some of the biggest contributors to the American economy, have actually committed to still moving forward.
Yeah, but Dr. Fabi, can we look at it like legally and all of that? Can that work successfully, that the country pulls out, but states in the country still go ahead with the funding and participation?
So what the world will miss might be national level commitments that the US might have made to things like climate finance, things like loss funds, funds that are intended to support developing countries that might be making efforts in climate that requires that major emitters like the US, China, Russia, and a lot of historically high emitters would support the functioning of those nations. But at the end of the day, the most important thing about climate change is that you want to prevent carbon emissions. And carbon emissions don't care whether they're coming from New York or whether they're coming from Lagos or whether they're coming from Johannesburg. The most important thing is to make sure that we're reducing those things that cause emissions to go into the atmosphere in the first place. And the US is has a federal structure. And the federal structure of the US means states have a lot of power to do a lot of things by themselves. So in fact, right now, California has way more stringent emissions guidelines and regulations than the federal government of the US has, for example. California also already has one of the most robust carbon credit systems, not just within the US, but in the world. And so my expectation is that as far as emissions are concerned, we will still see many US states and corporate organizations maintain their commitments, because what drives that is very different from what's happening at the national level. What the world will miss, without a doubt, is perhaps American leadership in helping to fund some of this work that was, as I indicated earlier, supposed to take place in developing countries. And that level of support has been in the low tens of billions. And so, yes, the world will certainly miss that level of financing. But the key thing is that the work towards reducing carbon emissions might be slowed down, but it will not be eradicated completely because of the US climate alliance with these states.
Well, I guess the biggest losers here, if I could use that word, would be the developing countries, because if the funding drastically goes down, then it's the developing countries who are supposed to be accessing those funds that would really feel the pinch.
It's true. The developing countries will, without a doubt, feel the pinch. The reality, however, is that the US has actually historically, a lot of people don't realize this. Before the Paris Agreement, there was a Kyoto Protocol. The US signed but never ratified that protocol. The Paris Accord was one of the first times that the US actually drove, this was during the Obama administration, worked hard to get that agreement done and also ratified it. So yes, there will be a number of climate-related efforts that will suffer from the lack of financing at the international level. But the truth of the matter, again, is that the US was never historically the largest contributor to the climate finance globally. Other nations, the European nations, for instance, are taking a bigger lead in that type of financing. Canada had always taken a bigger lead in that type of financing. Global climate financing had always been an issue of political contention within the US. So in terms of funding, I don't think there would be much that is missed. It would be reduced, but I still believe that a lot of the work that needs to be done in terms of financing, a lot of the work that the developing nations are undertaking can still be met by the commitments that other nations have had. And I think, again, as I indicated earlier, the most important thing is that in terms of whether or not the world will be able to meet the target that we've set in the Paris Agreement, which is to reduce emissions to a level that allows us to ensure that we don't exceed the 2 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures that would lead to significant catastrophic effects. The fact that you have this alliance in the US that is taking action in spite of what the federal government is doing is going to help us meet those targets. Perhaps it might delay those targets, but certainly, it will certainly help us ensure that we continue to see action towards reducing global emissions.
All right, Dr. Fabi, thank you so much for your time and your views this morning. Dr. Malcolm Fabi is a climate technology and sustainability expert.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you.
All right, so that's it on the program. Thank you so much for being a part of Business Morning. In a couple of hours, I'll be back. That's Business Incorporated. We'll do another round, 55 minutes round, the world of business. So whatever you missed here, and those unfinished conversations like the crypto one and the crypto reserve in the United States, we'll have this conversation in the afternoon. Do stay with us. I'm Ini John Mekwa. Go make some money. Talk to you later.